Mia Alif Chung was stabbed to death by a French national at a hostel nearly 5 years ago. At the time of her death, Mia was undertaking her 88 days of farm work so she could stay an extra year in Australia.
To say she was reluctant was an understatement. Although we lived in the countryside, she wasn't what you call the outdoors type.
Mia's mother says she had hoped the experience would be fun.
I think she knew a lot more about it than I did. I found her reservations quite comical because I quite relished the idea of her actually doing some hard physical labour. I didn't think it would do her any harm.
But it did. So Ms Alif has been lobbying for reform ever since Mia's death.
I really seriously thought that it could be so much better if it were run properly.
She repeatedly hears horrifying stories of assault and neglect.
First, there's no register of employers in the public domain. Then there's no register of anybody who is embarking on the farm work.
What happened to Mia and the visa was a major sticking point in the free trade agreement talks between Australia and the UK.
It will make it easier for British people, for young people to go and work in Australia without, I think, having the traditional compulsion of having to go and work on a farm.
While Dave McNeil didn't know anything about his placement before arriving, he had a positive experience.
It was stressful and it was sort of frustrating that I was in that situation, that I had to do it. Definitely sort of out of my comfort zone. But I look back on it, I was very lucky.
Provided the deal passes Parliament, the UK working holiday visa holders will be able to stay 3 years and the compulsory regional stint will be scrapped.
UK young people are being pulled out of the system, but it doesn't solve any problems because they'll just be replaced and the same iniquities will exist because of that power imbalance.
And to make up the 10,000 job shortfall, agriculture and agribusiness specific visas for the UK and ASEAN countries will be created.
It just gives confidence into the future, and it's also important to understand that those conditions on the UK working holiday maker piece in agriculture won't be phased in for 5 years, but we intend to have this visa up by the end of the year.
Workers from ASEAN countries could work 9 months a year for 3 years. But Adelaide University labour expert Dr Joanna Howe is concerned the new visa won't have strict employer obligations.
The problem with the ag visa is that it will exacerbate the race to the bottom. We already have Pacific workers who are well regulated and then they are undermined in the labour market by the cheap labour provided by backpackers because there's no regulation. Those growers don't have to be pre-approved. And then underneath that, we have undocumented migrants. So if we add ag visa workers from ASEAN countries on top of that, we now have 4 different separate pathways for temporary migrants into the horticulture labour market. The government will also have to do some very serious thinking about how to regulate this visa, and there'll be big internal fights within the coalition about how to make this happen.
Stephanie Boltje reporting there. Wendy, let's just talk about the scope of the challenge with trying to find, in the middle of a pandemic, an agricultural workforce.
It's really tough. It's not a problem that is directly because of the pandemic. I mean, this is not new news. If you go back, I was looking up a report that came out in 2010 and it forecast a shortage of over 100,000 in terms of workers on farms within 10 years to do a variety of jobs on farms. So you can't say it's entirely COVID, but it's certainly not helped. And I think the current visa that's being talked about is particularly probably aimed, as I understand it, at horticulture. And I think we've heard lots of stories about, fruit growers can't get the fruit off the trees. Cherry saw images of cherries. The good side of that is that horticulture has been booming. Australia's been doing well in a range of its crops, getting them into other markets overseas. So we've been really successful there, which has exacerbated the problem. And COVID comes along and wham, you've got another factor. And they're not jobs that Australians want to do, by and large. So we've got a huge shortage.
And then you lose another 8,000, let's say, as this requirement for the British backpackers is phased out.
It's phased out,
It used to be that if you wanted to stay a year, you could. If you wanted to stay another year, you had to do your 88 days. And if you wanted to stay a third year, you had to do another 88 days. And that's how it worked. Bull, it's really interesting to think about who's picking the fruit in this country? And there seems to be a two-speed sort of a system. There's this system where Pacific Island workers and people from East Timor come, and there's all these wraparound services and guarantees and pastoral care and ensuring that they get to religious services and sporting stuff and that accommodation and minimum hours of work. And then there are backpackers.
Yep. And there's a third group, which is in fact larger than the backpacker group at the moment. And they are asylum seekers. There's about 60 to 70,000 people in the asylum seeker backlog. And there's another 27,000 who have been refused asylum at the AAT, but have not gone home, have to find a way to survive, and therefore they end up working without work rights in a shadow economy. So there's a large group there. But if I might just take your listeners back in history a little bit, I spent 20 years in the Department of Immigration, and one thing we said to ourselves throughout that 20 years was that Australia should never become a low-skill guest worker society. We said that because we could see what had happened in the United States, we could see what had happened in some countries in Europe, we could see what had happened in Gulf countries, and I've been advised recently it also happened in Taiwan. Essentially, there has never been a low-skill guest worker program that hasn't resulted in massive levels of exploitation and abuse. Never. And my fear is, over the last 10 years, that is where we've been heading, and the latest development takes us down that path even further. It fundamentally changes the character of Australia. It says that there are some jobs that Australians will not do. It is beneath their dignity to do it, and there is no level of pay or condition that will ever make them do it. Those jobs must be done by people brought in from overseas, usually black and brown people, who must do that job for us because it is beneath our dignity. We in the Department of Immigration for so long said, surely that is not Australia.